wonderful friends, it's Evelyn here. Welcome back to the channel, and as always, first thing, a huge thank you to each and every one of you for your support here on the channel and for your love of last week's 1940s inspired loungewear video. As you can see, yes, I'm wearing it now. It has quickly become a staple in my wardrobe. And this week, we're finally going to get to cut into that gorgeous Duchess satin fabric. But my friends, before we get to creating that final set, make sure that if you haven't done so already, you hit that all-important subscribe button down below for me, my friends, so that you never miss a video. But without further ado, grab yourself a cuppa. Let's get to some creating. And here it is, that gorgeous satin. One of Minerva's core range fabrics. This medium weight Duchess satin is just stunning. The footage really does not do it justice. At 59 inches wide, it gives you more fabric for your pennies, my friends, and it's a great width to fit on those super wide trousers that I'm creating. So let's get to that pattern. Looking at my mock-up version, there are only a few things that I want to alter for this satin version. The first is to heighten the crotch seam, as this was a little low, so I've simply marked 1.5 inches above the original crotch point on the pattern piece, tapering the seam allowance into this new point. I also lowered the waistline by an inch, as the waistline on the trousers felt a little high. Thinking about that waistline, because this satin is non-stretch unlike last week's Liverpool mock-up fabric, I could have added some extra ease to the waist this time, but my mock-up set were quite roomy, so I'm not going to need to. How wonderfully simple this week. The legs on my trousers were a little long, however, so I've shortened them slightly. The top turned out just how I planned, so there's no adjustments there. But there is one thing I want to add to this version, and that is button cuffs. Because this satin isn't a stretch fabric, the cute little cuffs from the first version wouldn't fit over my hands in this non-stretch fabric. Firstly, I'm going to add an extra inch to the length of the original cuff piece. This will allow us to add a button to the piece later on. Drafting and cutting out all done, it's time to get to some sewing. Constructing this satin set follows the exact same process as for our spotty set last week, with one exception, our button cuffs. I started with the trousers, firstly with the pleats, which look so classy in this beautiful satin, but they definitely need a good press, and this fabric really does benefit from pressing, so I did a lot of it. Then pinning and sewing the two trouser legs. Placing one inside the other, right sides together, to then sew the crotch seam. The waistband is created in the same way, using that 1 inch elastic. And then it's attached to the trouser waistband. And the only thing remaining is to hem the trousers, and they are complete. On to the top, beginning by finishing the neckline on the front and back bodice pieces. Then sewing the bust darts. And then on to the side and shoulder seams. I then went and attached that waist tie. sleeves now. Grabbing the sleeve, let's create those button cuffs. Pin and sew the underarm seams on each sleeve, leaving the last 3.5 inches before the wrist edge open. Press the seams open and fold the seam allowance of the unsewn section in by 1/4 inch once and then twice to finish the raw edge before top stitching it in place. Run a gathering stitch all along the sleeve hem edge on each sleeve, ready to gather into those cuffs. Create the cuff pieces by folding them in half lengthways, right sides together. Stitch one end closed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Stitch the other short end closed also, but pivot your stitching to carry on for 1 inch along the length of the cuff. This creates the button band. Now attach those cuffs to the sleeves, pinning and then stitching one open long edge of your cuff to the wrist of the sleeve, right sides together. Pull on those gathering stitches to fit that sleeve edge into the cuff. Leave the other long edge open to hand finish later. I grabbed one of these cover button sets and created 2 buttons covered with my satin fabric. Sew a buttonhole and your covered button in place to complete. To finish those cuffs, fold the seam allowance of the remaining raw edge to the inside and pin all along the inside of the sleeve, concealing the seam and seam allowance inside the cuff before hand stitching neatly in place. Set those sleeves into the bodice, and yes, my friends, it's finally reveal time. Well, 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 successful me made and me designed and drafted creations 2 weeks in a row. This satin is to die for, and I might already be spying it in different shades to make even more sets just like this one. The adjustments that I made to last week's pattern were spot on, and I'm in love with the little button cuffs. I'm definitely going to be making more tops with that detail. Satin like this Duchess satin can fray quite a bit, so my top tip when working with this fabric: zigzag or overlock the edges of your pattern pieces before you start sewing, my friends. You'll thank me, I promise. Well, I'm off for a celebratory cuppa. See you next week, my friends. Stay safe. Bye.